Okay, we're back, we're live, and that means we are alive. Not everybody is alive. Some people are being killed. This is Rabbi Itchel Krasnjansky. He's the rabbi of Chabad, Hawaii. Welcome to the show, Rabbi.
Thank you, Jay. It's a pleasure to be here.
I went to your service yesterday. Overpowering. This is about the crisis on the streets of Israel. I get very emotional. And then I slept on it and thought about it. And this morning I said to everybody I met in the street, do you know that people are being stabbed? Israelis are being stabbed on the streets of their country, Israel, by people who would murder them as soon as look at them, strangers who would stab them repeatedly to kill them. And this is happening by the dozens now. And it's happening over the past few weeks. And I found to my amazement that nobody I asked that question, nobody knew what was going on. So we have two tragedies. We have the fact that it is happening, and we have the fact that nobody knows what is going on. Rabbi, what is going on?
Well, I think, Jay, that you pinpointed the problem. Well, obviously the real crisis is the wave of terrorists and terrorism that's happening in the streets of Israel, where young Arab kids, they're not more than kids, young kids, men and women, boys and girls, who are just unprovoked, just going and stabbing people. In the last 2 weeks, I believe, there wasn't a day where there weren't stabbings and fatalities, killing people. And this is a it's a very frightening phenomena. People in Israel don't know what to do. They're afraid to go out in the streets. And thank God, the people are very vigilant. And the Israeli army is very vigilant, and they have tried the best that they could, and they were successful to some degree to kill those killers, to stop them in their tracks. It's still not a solution to the problem, but it's something that's been with the Jews in Israel for a very, very long time. They've been suffering from terrorist attacks.
But Israel is a democratic country. Israel allows Arabs to be citizens and to succeed. Israel, they have Arab brain surgeons in Israel. You have, opportunities. Everyone has opportunities in Israel. Why would a young Arab kid or young kid, whatever, you said they were teenagers, but some of them are older than that.
Right.
Why would they, stab and try to kill strangers like that? Why would they do that?
That is the most difficult question to answer. And, well, to start off with, as we were talking about before the show, that tragically, this whole generation of Palestinians have been raised from their infancy with hatred towards Israel, towards the Jews, as Israel being the occupiers, and Israel is the root of all evil, there's evil Zionists. And when you are fed that day in, day out, when there is a terrorist attack and the parents go out in the streets and give candies to the children to celebrate this wonderful thing, and when a terrorist gets killed and they raise him to the level of being a martyr who will now merit to be met by 70 virgins on the other side, and that's what these kids grow up striving to be and to do. It's something that we cannot wrap our minds around.
No.
And what's interesting is that there were many people within the Israeli society and the Israeli government those on the left primarily, who felt, based on pressure from the United States and the world bodies and community, that if we just made life tolerable for the Palestinians, if we gave them a state, if we gave them opportunity, then they won't be angry and they won't be killing, and then they'll be spending their lives the way we spend our lives, working and building, raising families and paying mortgages and traveling and doing all the things that people do. And this was met with utter failure. As you know, in the most recent example, Israel left the whole Gaza Strip under Ariel Sharon, the then prime minister, gave them this whole territory so they can build a country and a nation for themselves, gave them hundreds of millions of dollars worth of greenhouses that the Israelis built while they were living in Gaza, and with the thought that they will now finally turn their attention to building this nation, country for themselves, nation state for themselves, educate their children, and develop a society like most Western countries have. But in turn, in fact, the very opposite happened. They turned it into a platform to lob missiles into Israel, to send terrorists into Israel, and they haven't given any opportunities to the people living there. The greenhouses that the Israelis built and cultivated, they destroyed immediately. So you're talking about people with a different mindset. And the question is, how do you deal with people with that kind of a mindset?
Very, very scary. Well, you know, the argument has been made that that when these fellas come out with the knives, and they do a kind of sewing machine stitch on people. They come at you very quickly, usually from behind, stab you in the back repeatedly, stab you in places which are likely to be fatal,
Over here.
in the neck,
Right.
under the arm. They've been trained to do that. That they are somehow provoked. And, you know, I guess I would ask you, what kind of provocation could you find to support a street murder?
Well, I think it wouldn't be much different than a murderer here in the streets here in Honolulu who would say after he murders that he was provoked. You know, as we all know, that's not a justification for murder. But the truth is that Israel has done nothing to provoke the Arabs, the Palestinians. Israel is a democratic country. The Palestinians and the Arabs who live in Israel are more free in the Israeli society than in any other Arab country in the Middle East. If they choose to, they become doctors and business people and what have you. This whole lie, charade about Israel being the an occupier that's suppressing the Palestinian people is really it's just a plain lie. Israel has, from its very, very beginnings in 1948, reached out to the Arab nations that it's surrounded by, and the Palestinian people, and the Arabs who live in Israel, and was seeking peace and is still seeking peace. But you cannot have peace if your partner doesn't want peace. And the Jews, interestingly, were refugees also at that time. Most of the Jews had those who survived the concentration camps and World War II and the Nazi Holocaust, were all refugees. And many of them made their way to Israel. Many of them came to America or to other countries around the world, and with nothing other than their shirts on their backs, and they were thrilled to be alive, even though that they were heartbroken over their loved ones that were murdered in Europe in the Holocaust. And in a generation or less, they've turned their lives around. They have built families and communities and successful communities. And the Palestinians, who were claimed to be refugees from the 1948 war, 60 years later are still living, their great-grandchildren are still living in these refugee camps funded by the United Nations, and are really, if you look at it very objectively, you'll see that they're really kept there as a tool by other Arab nations and those who seek to destroy Israel as a propaganda tool against Israel, to be able to besmirch Israel by saying, look how you're treating the Palestinians.
Yeah. Well, you know, Hamas supports this. Hamas is either organizing this or supporting it to the extent that it possibly can. There are individual acts by individual people who are murdering others, but Hamas wants this to happen, am I right?
Yeah, not only Hamas, even the PA, the Palestinian Authority, that the world considers to be a legitimate organization, also not only applauds what the terrorists do, but supports it actually with monies. They give money to the families of the murdered terrorists. They give money to the families who have members in jail because of their terrorist activities. And they, one of the terrorists just 2 weeks ago, who murdered, I think from the first one who murdered one of the Israelis was a law student. And he was shot dead by the Israeli army. And I think it was the next day or 2 days later, the university, one of the universities there, gave him an honorary law degree.
For murder.
For murder.
There you go. Strange. It's all, may I say, crazy.
It is
It's
crazy.
crazy to go out in the street and kill somebody out of a kind of an ill-defined hatred, somebody you don't even know. And then it's crazy for the neighborhood or his family to award him a degree, make him a martyr because he went and did a murderous act. This is crazy. This is not sustainable, you know, as a matter of humankind. We can't live this way. And yet, as I walked to work today and I made my rounds, I asked everybody I met, Rabbi, do you know about the stabbings on the streets of Israel? Not one person knew. Why is this?
Well, that's touching upon a whole other discussion, a very sad discussion, and that is that Israel does not get to tell its side of the story. And when it is told in the world press, in the world media, it's skewed and it's slanted against Israel. And it begins with the New York Times that is always biased in its reporting against Israel. And there's a whole organization called Memory, and it's an abbreviation for, I forget the exact abbreviation, but it's for to correct the misstatements that the media puts out about facts on the ground in Israel. And the question begs as to why is that? Why is the media so biased against Israel? And it's not just the media, it's also the Europe the European Commission is always standing up with the terrorists, with the Palestinians against Israel. In the past year, summer, when Israel was fighting to protect itself against the war in Gaza, where the Hamas started with this terrorist act.
And they kept on shooting rockets through it.
Kept on shooting
Never
rockets.
stopped.
Never stopped.
Continuing provocation.
And the head of the European Commission came out and said that they were seeking to bring Israel to the International Criminal Court of Justice because of how Israel responded to these attacks.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's like the world has gone insane.
It has. The world has gone insane on this. I cannot understand it, and I don't understand why people in general don't understand it. I give you a hypothetical. Suppose this happened on the streets of Boston, New York, Washington.
Honolulu.
Honolulu, thank you. I mean, you can easily imagine it could happen to any of us with the sewing machine under the arm, in the neck, killing us. What would happen to those communities? They would go crazy.
And I think that the critical point is, if something like that happened here, and you would hear a chorus of people saying that this person was provoked because he was denied his rights and because he hasn't been given all of the housing and food and has been discriminated against in his job, that would create a circumstance where it would happen again and again and again and again. But if, when these things happen, not only the law enforcement would respond swiftly and forcefully, but also the opinion makers would all articulate and recognize that this is unacceptable. Such evil is unacceptable in the streets of civilized society.
Any city in a civilized world.
Then it doesn't allow for it to breed and to grow. But in Israel, you have a situation where when these murderers are unprovokedly stabbing Jews, the world, including the White House, response is that both sides have to be careful not to inflame, not to flame the situation, as if to equivocate what the murderers, Palestinians, are doing, and the response of those who are trying to protect themselves and protect their citizens.
That's crazy.
That
actually encourages
exactly.
continuation
exactly.
of these murderous stabbings.
Exactly.
That's what it does.
Exactly.
And that's why, or it's one of the reasons why, anyway, it continues. And then you have the chorus chiming. You have Hamas saying, "Go for it, boys." And you have, when I read, I don't know if it's true, but I read that ISIS was also cheering them on. And you said there were other organizations that were cheering them on. So that makes it harder to stop when you have the terrorist organization cheering them on, and call it the West. The West doesn't say anything.
Well, first of all, it begins with their own society. Forget the terrorist organizations. Where are their governments? Where are their political leaders? Where do you hear the condemnation of these kinds of acts? You don't. You only hear either quiet support on the streets or vocal support.
Yeah.
So it's rotten to its core.
Yeah, it is. And it's the winds of war, you know what I mean? It's a breakdown of society, a breakdown of morality. It's what happens before a huge conflagration. That's what it feels like to me. But what are the Israelis doing? Now at the service yesterday, you and the Rebbitzin had some movies that you got off the internet, which were very impressive in many ways. And I can't remember them all, but I'll tell you what sticks in my mind. And we should play some of them. But I remember that there was an organized ambulance corps.
Yes.
on motor scooters.
Right.
Doctors on motor scooters who would or paramedics on motor scooters who would go out into the community, get through the traffic, and get to somebody who had been stabbed within 90 seconds, the movie said, which is very impressive. And that's the kind of Israeli innovation you'll love to see. That's why they can do all their high-tech stuff. That's why they can make the desert bloom. That's why they can build a society, out of sand, build a modern Western society, and democratic even at the same time, because they think like that to make a motor scooter ambulance get through the traffic and save lives. Amazing. But there were many other videos. Maybe we can show some of them, and you can talk about them.
Sure. I'd love to.
Let's see.
Take a brief tour through the past 3,500 years of world history. Whether it was Pharaoh, absolute ruler of Egypt, the most powerful world empire of the day, or the Philistines, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, or Haman, prime minister of the mighty Persian Empire, or the Greeks, the Romans, the Ottomans, the Tsars, the Nazis. All of these individuals, empires, and nations had two things in common. They all attacked and oppressed Israel and the Jewish people, and they all eventually vanished from the face of the earth. Israel, on the other hand, remains against all odds, a tiny island of democracy the size of New Jersey, thriving amid a sea of tyranny and terror. Now, I don't believe this is a coincidence, but whether you believe, like I do, that God's divine hand is upon Israel, or you don't believe at all, it's a pretty safe bet that Israel will still be around 25 years from now. The Iranian regime, on the other hand, is a different story. By seeking Israel's destruction, Ayatollah Khamenei and Iran's mullahs have signed their own death warrant. So have Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, and all the rest, just as Pharaoh, Haman, Hitler, and many others did before them. It never ceases to amaze me, but nation after nation still refuses to believe what God promised Abraham some 4,000 years ago regarding the people of Israel. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. In the book of Joel, chapter 3, verse 2, God takes it one step further, saying, I will gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat in Israel. There I will put them on trial for what they did to my inheritance, my people Israel, because they scattered my people among the nations and divided up my land. Now that's bad news for Ayatollah Khamenei. It will not be easy, but folks, Israel will not only survive, it will thrive. History and the God of all history guarantee it. Now, as for the United States, if we stop shaking our fist at God and turn back to Him humbly, we can also thrive again. But from whom much has been given, much is required. We've been blessed more than any nation in the history of the world. God's hand has been on America from its founding. But we don't seem to have much time for Him anymore. These days, we seem to think we know what's best, not Him. Maybe that's why the barbarians are not just at the gates now, they're inside them.
What do you think, Rabbi?
It's a very interesting observation. Many historians have marveled at the fact that the Jewish people, the Jewish nation, is still alive today, in spite of a long history of Inquisition and murderers and pogroms and the Holocaust, and all of these mighty empires that have subjected the Jews to this kind of torture. They've long gone from the world stage, and Israel is still alive and well. And it's very hard to rationally explain it or understand it. The natural order of things is that just like people come and go, nations come and go. But the Jewish nation seems to be what is referred to as the eternal people of God. It has,
Knock wood. Knock wood.
and the same is true about Israel. And this is speaks to the question of what is the claim that the Jews have over Israel, the historic claim. Just bring out one point is that after the destruction of the Second Temple, around the BC era, and the Jews were scattered around the world and exiled from the land of Israel. The land of Israel lay desolate as a desert, uncultivated desert. It was harsh living, and no nation, no occupier was ever able to turn it into a living society where people can live and grow communities. It was only after the Jews came back in the beginning of the 20th century, 19th, 20th century, and Israel was established as a state in 1948, that Israel took that desert and turned it into a remarkable, transformative place. Israel today is not just the only democratic society in that whole region. All the other forms of government are dictatorial. Israel, in its Knesset, in its parliament, has Arabs representative. We don't have communists in our Senate here in the United States. And Israel has built magnificent cities. Israel is in the forefront of technology, as you know. It's been called the high-tech country in medicine and in science. All the while that it's trying to survive the onslaught of these terrorists. And it's an amazing resilience of the part of the people in Israel to be able to, life goes on. People there are building families, they're happy, there's life in the streets in Israel, even in these very difficult times.
Yeah.
And that's a godly blessing, I think.
Yeah, but I worry. Because this one's on the street, right in front of you. You walk a block, you take a risk. So we have to do things.
Yes.
Or we have to do things.
Yes.
How about another video? You got one more? Okay, this is a photo of...
Want me to comment?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, this is a photo of a young woman at the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall in Israel, in Jerusalem. This is the last remaining wall from the temple, the Second Temple in Israel. And it's a holy site where Jews from around the world come together and they pray, and they also put little notes in the crevices of the rocks in the hope and the tradition that these messages get carried on high to God, and God answers.
You've done this.
Prayers many times. I've had the privilege to do this many times. So.
What else you got? Okay, here's some footage from Israel.
Yeah, I think this is the showing the different terrorist attacks, the bombings of the buses, and the terrible casualties that were inflicted on the people in Israel.
Yeah. Okay, why don't you
This is a take from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, the leader of the worldwide Chabad movement. He's passed on a little over 20 years, but he encouraged Jewish people not to be afraid, and quoting from the Bible that Israel is a place where God's eyes are upon it. And Rebbe was very supportive and supporting people in their support of Israel. The Rebbe was a big, big advocate of peace from strength, that Israel should not give back any territories, because that not only will not invite peace, but that will actually cause more bloodshed, which was counter to the prevalent thinking that if we give the Arabs and we give in to their demands, then they'll be happy and it will be peace.
It hasn't worked yet.
It hasn't worked out. The bulk of the tragedies and the terrorist acts that happened in Israel happened after the Oslo Accords, where Israel agreed to give into 99% of what Arafat demanded.
You mentioned you were, concerned about the White House on this. I am too. But what has the White House done or not done to help or to hinder, the state of Israel?
Well, that's a very
I know it's a whole show all of itself.
it's a whole show all of itself, and it's a very difficult thing to talk about. But this administration has not only not been supportive of Israel, but it seems that it's always seeking to undermine Israel's right to defend itself, Israel's ability to defend itself, and weakening Israel's hand in the face of these terrorists, and in the mistaken assumption that by bolstering the Arabs, that will bring peace. It has proven to be a failed policy, and it overlaps with the issue of the Iran deal, with allowing them to develop a nuclear bomb down the road, and segregating the issue of Iran's bullying and supporting Hezbollah and Hamas and all the other activities that they do, including their verbal threats to annihilate Israel, and yet turning a blind eye to that possibility, and rewarding them by, yesterday they began to dismantle the sanctions against Iran, giving them access to hundreds of millions of billions of dollars. And what's ironic is that Obama is so outspoken against the proliferation of guns in our society here. And every time that there's a shooting, he points out and say, when you give guns to irresponsible people, this is what happens. We have to have gun control. And yet, on the world stage, he's giving the biggest gun that one can have, the atomic bomb. He's giving it to the most irresponsible nation that even America says is irresponsible, but we cannot fix everything. We can just give them this.
They still have our journalists in jail.
Yes.
Even though we made a deal with them. What kind of a deal is that anyway? But,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, here we're approaching the end of our time here on the show, and what can be done? What should be done? We know that, that people in Israel, Israeli citizens, are buying handguns. I saw that in one of the videos yesterday. We know that it's bringing Israel together in an ironic way. We know that Israel has the innovation to create medical services that will save lives, including Arab lives, by the way.
That's true.
Those kids or youth people who kill and then themselves get wounded in the process, they're taken into the same hospitals.
True.
So I find that very ironic. I don't know what else Israel can do. I keep seeing myself walking on the street there, and this happens to me. I don't know what I would do. I don't know what kind of training I could have. I don't know what I would do to defend myself.
Yeah, well, you're right. There are things that the Israeli government is doing and has to do to find continued ways to protect its citizens from these terrorists. The Israeli society, like you're saying, they saved many situations by quickly stepping in and either shooting the terrorists or neutralizing the terrorists. And it's not just bringing the Jews in Israel together, but it's bringing Jews around the world together, and all those people in the world who love Jews, many Christians and other people who have an admiration for the Jewish people. And as far as Jews goes, we are an organic whole. That's what our religious teachings speak to, that we are all intrinsically one and need to look out for one another. And practically what we can do is, on many levels, on the political level, that we can write to our congressmen, senators, and pointing out, what America needs to do to support Israel, rather than tie Israel's hands behind their backs. And I think it's important for people to actually go and visit Israel and show the people in Israel that we are in solidarity with them. And Israel is, contrary to what we see, in the media, it is a safe place. Yes, all of these terrorist activities are happening now, but this is an aberration. This is not the norm. It's actually a very, very safe place.
On the media, let's spend a few minutes on that. It really strikes me funny that, today we have the Honolulu Advertiser, which has access, as we know, to all the stuff out of the New York Times, Associated Press, and they pull stories from every place in the country, in the world. But today, the newspaper headline is about the weather. There is no storm right now, but it's sort of a kind of a summary of storms.
This is Hawaii.
Maybe there's not a lot of news going on, according to them. But what would you say to the press? Not only the Honolulu Star-Advertiser, not only National Public Radio, which I don't feel represents both sides, or at least doesn't represent the Israeli side of the story. And I really wonder whether there really are two sides here. Let's see. We got the murderer, and we got the victim. So does the murderer, does he have a right to speak about what he did? I'm not sure he does. The victim is the one who should speak.
Yeah.
What would you say to the press, Rabbi?
I think the press is part of the problem, and it is very irresponsible in the way it reports. It's, like I said before, and you're pointing out, it's slanted against Israel. If you look in the New York Times, last week, the articles begin, Israel shoots dead 4 Palestinians. And then if you look into the article, it says, yeah, these Palestinians were the terrorists who actually murdered Jews or injured
On the
Jews
streets.
on the
with
streets,
knives.
right? And these and the Israeli armed forces stopped them in the tracks. But the headline of the article is that Israel kills 4 Palestinians.
See what happens, that fans the flames.
Yes, it does.
It's totally irresponsible.
Totally.
And it happens regularly. It happens in many papers in this country. I mean, they follow the lead of the New York Times, and they follow the lead of National Public Radio. I don't know why they can't tell what's really going on. I don't know why they can't put themselves in the shoes of the victims and the Israelis, who all the Israelis want is a quiet day.
Yes.
Just let me go shopping, do my job, whatever it is. I don't need to be murdered today.
So there's another aspect to it, and that is that as Jewish people and as people who are connected to the Holy Land of Israel and connected to each other on a spiritual level, there are things that we can do, both in terms of our spiritual connection to God, strengthening our spiritual connection to God, as well as doing whatever we can in strengthening our spiritual connection to the people in Israel. And we as Jews believe that that is a real factor in the miraculous survival of the state of Israel. So as Jews, I think if we strengthen our connection to Judaism and learn more about Judaism and the history of Israel and become proud Jews and recognize the great contributions that Israel today makes in the world, which cover almost every area of life in the modern world today. And at the same time, it's a tolerant country. It's a country that opens up its doors to anyone who seeks to live in peace.
It's a Western country. It's a fun country. It's an intellectual country. It's a country with all the sensibilities you would expect. It's easy to live there, except for the fact that once in a while you get murdered on the street. Terrible. You know what people can do, though, Rabbi? They can look at YouTube, because YouTube is unfettered, not the way National Public Radio or the newspapers are. People send in videos of what happens on the street. And what's interesting in our time, more and more now, is that people have cameras in their phones, and they take real-time pictures of these murders happening. And you can see it with your own eyes on YouTube. If you dial up stabbings in Israel, you'll see dozens of videos of the actual stabbings taking place. But what is very, very disturbing about that is that YouTube allows people to make comments. And if you look at the comments, if you dare to look at the comments, you will see the most incredible anti-Semitic remarks made. Incredible, unbelievable in anybody. But it's anonymous, and I guess that's the way YouTube works, that people can make the most incredible remarks about what happened, and anti-Semitic remarks. I don't want to repeat them. But the point is that in a high-tech society, and with the benefit of YouTube, you can get the news, you can see, as opposed to all the people I talked to this morning who didn't have a clue about what was going on. You can learn exactly what's going on real time on YouTube.
Yeah, I think you're correct. I think one of the amazing things is that you would think that Israel, the society, is all twisted out of shape and all dysfunctional and depressed because of all of the crazy stuff that's going on there. But in an inexplicable way, like you say, it's a very, very vibrant society. It's a very full of life and full of ideas and amazing things going on there. And it cannot be explained rationally. There's a higher power there.
It's true. There's a vitality that you don't find anywhere else. So will this intifada pass? Will people get tired of doing this? Will we return to some state of normalcy? When will that happen?
Well, you're speaking to a rabbi, and as a rabbi, I can only share with you what Judaism teaches us. And what Judaism teaches us is that in the cosmic battle between good and evil, good will ultimately prevail. And this has been the conviction within Judaism from the first difficulty and anti-Semitic reality that it had to confront with. And yes, the people in Israel and the Jewish people around the world believe in God and believe in the good God, and that ultimately things will turn around and good will prevail. Will the United Nations be a part of it? I don't think so. They're not adding to the good, unfortunately. It's left to see, and hopefully America traditionally has been an ally and a supporter of Israel. The last couple of years it's been left wanting as to what it could do and what it's doing. But ultimately the forces of good will prevail and peace will be in the land of Israel.
Hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yes, today hopefully.
Yeah. Rabbi Itchel Krasnjansky, Chabad of Hawaii, thank you so much for coming down and talking to us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you come back soon. I'll be calling you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye. Thank you, Jay.